Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's really paramount that people get migration legal advice to be able to count those points, not just counting the points, but also making sure that they meet all of the requirements. At Asset Migration, we do that. We've got all of the tools to be able to count your points properly. Unfortunately, there are a lot of clients that do come and they come with a question. They've done a lot of this DIY. They've assumed that they've got an X amount of points, however, they've overcounted. And this can be very easily done if you don't have all of the tools to be able to count them properly. So there's many cases where I've seen that people have counted their education back home. However, what they believe to be equivalent of a bachelor degree, when we actually look at what Australia deems, and which is what the Department of Home Affairs, they have this data as well, they actually deem that as a diploma. So if people are overcounting for that, then when it comes to the actual visa application, at nomination time, it means nothing. When you actually apply for the visa and Department of Home Affairs look and they count properly at all of the points that you've claimed. If you've overclaimed, if you've underclaimed, that's fine. But if you've overclaimed and say, for example, you've assumed that you have a bachelor degree level back home and it's determined to be a diploma level here in Australia, they will refuse the visa. No. So there's a big disclaimer for Migration NT for a lot of the state governments. When they are giving state nominations, they give a big disclaimer and state that what you've given to us, if you've stated 65 points and we believe that you're meeting other criteria, say residents meeting all of those requirements, they basically do an investigation on that. The points that you've claimed towards your studies and whatnot, that is mainly investigated by the Department of Home Affairs. So if you get the NT nomination, for example, for 491, that's not a guarantee that you're going to be getting a visa. Unfortunately, it's only the Department of Home Affairs that can guarantee whether a visa is approved or refused. Yeah, unfortunately, that's where a lot of people go wrong. They do a bit of a DIY and they overcount. They go to the Department of Home Affairs. Unfortunately, it's refused the visa. If they go back to, for example, Migration NT, any other state governments, it's unlikely that they will be given another invitation, unfortunately, for nomination. Yeah, it's only one time, so you've got to be very careful. Our team, we're very thorough with how we count the points and make sure that you are eligible before we put in an expression of interest. If you're not meeting the requirements at a certain time, we will not submit that on your behalf, as we just know that you won't be invited. So people with a 491 or 190 invitation, they can miscalculate the points for both. So even if you're applying for 491 or 190, if you miscalculate, it's still the same scenario. So a lot of the other states do state that you need about 65 points to be eligible. However, when you do and you crunch the numbers, the amount of people that apply and may be eligible meeting NT residency requirements, it's far less of an amount than it is, say, if you were competing for a 491 in New South Wales. The amount of expression of interest that are received in places like that, just due to the immense number of people, is the chances are, I'd say, a bit lower. Yeah, when you're counting all of the numbers. In the Northern Territory, small population, people do believe it's a sacrifice to come up and live here, even though it's a beautiful place. A lot of people are deterred by the fact that it's too hot, so they don't want to come up here and even try for state nomination. So the chances can be in your favour. Yeah, so that can be possible based on if we have an agreement with the employer, if they'd like us to facilitate that, then that's another agreement. However, when people do generally come into the office and they ask to have information based on Dharma, usually we don't connect them with the jobs when they're physically here and they're onshore. That would need to be an agreement that we have with the actual business to see if they'd like us to be able to recruit people. But if a client comes and they don't know any businesses or whatnot, we usually state that they can make that organic employment recruitment process with an employer that's willing to sponsor them, and then it's a bit more organic that way. Then it's not that they've been set up on shore with these people. Who knows? They're not really familiar. People that have worked for an employer for a couple of months, and then there's that trust there. I see that there's a bit more of a chance for them to continue the sponsorship process instead of two people don't meet each other and they're forced to work with each other in a way, and it just, yeah, at times it doesn't work out. Sometimes it does, but I feel that more organic arrangements where people are hired and then eventually sponsored, then that's a bit more better.